A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm Celestine, Global Head of Automation and AI Services at Amiseq, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our webinar, Autonomous Finance, Real Outcomes, Real Impact in collaboration with Automation Anywhere. We have a packed session for you today around agentic automation in finance. We will start by exploring the transformation of finance using automation agents, followed by live demo of autonomous finance. We're also excited to host a fireside chat with our panelists to discuss real-world insights. And finally, we'll open the floor for questions. Before we move on, we dive into the content, let's quickly cover a few housekeeping items to ensure everyone has a great experience today. It'll be great to hear from you during the session. Please use the Q&A to submit questions at any time. We encourage you to use the chat to share your thoughts, comment on the discussion, or connect with attendees. The entire session is being recorded, and we will send the link directly to your inbox after we wrap up. Today, we have brought together an incredible panel of experts to show you exactly how to bring autonomous finance to life in your own finance department. Joining us first is Ken Merzel, Global Finance Leader at Automation Anywhere. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Over to you, Ken.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sistine. So as he mentioned, I'm Ken Mertzel. I lead our finance practice at Automation Anywhere. And prior to joining here 7.5 years ago, I spent my entire career in finance, most recently at Bank of America, where I was CFO of their insurance group and then led financial operations for the bank. So what I want to do today is just tell you a little bit about, who we are, make sure everyone understands what agentic automation is, and then really spend a majority of the time talking about what we see are high-value use cases in finance, and then we'll follow that with a demo of the capabilities. So overall, for anyone that's not familiar with Automation Anywhere, our overall vision is to create the autonomous enterprise. I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but you can see how the whole world's currently evolving as AI is enabling business, and we're a key player in that. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, you can go out to all the analyst websites and you can see that Gartner recognized us as a emerging leader in generative AI. Our origin started, 20 years ago in RPA, but several years ago, we saw the transition to AI and really taking a leadership role in that, as evidenced by, an article that came out about a year ago in Forbes, recognizing us as one of the seven wonders of AI. So what I want to do first is just make sure, for those of you who haven't heard the term agentic automation, I just wanted to explain what that is. And I think there's so much focus around AI these days that people don't realize that most processes involve a combination of technologies. So when we talk about agentic process automation, we're really talking about a combination of AI agents, automations that may include document automation, robotic process automation, a whole variety of technology, and incorporating human-in-the-loop capabilities. So if you look at the simple example, for example, in AP invoice processing, you can see really the combination where maybe RPA ingested documents coming in from an email, document automation would extract all the relevant information. You might leverage APIs to interact with your ERP systems. And then AI agents are particularly critical in summarizing vast amounts of information, perhaps doing matching or validation, and particularly helpful in terms of exception processing. So just think of agentic process automation as not purely AI, as really a combination of capabilities inclusive of AI. The other thing I want to mention is I think probably every single person these days is getting bombarded with about AI and AI agents. So I just want to provide a little clarification in terms of how we view all those agents out in the market. And so in the first column, you see like personal agents, right? So those are things like Microsoft Copilot, which are great at very simple tasks, particularly ones that are within their ecosystem. And then when you go to the next one, obviously all the ERPs, SAP, Oracle, et cetera, are all building their own agents. They tend to work best within their own ecosystem. They're finance specific agents. And then the third category, you see a lot of point solutions. So every single company that has point solutions around accounts payable, accounts receivable, also developing their own AI agents. But again, they're very specific to specific processes and specific tasks within those areas. And so the differentiation for us is our AI process agents really are intended to work across all applications and frankly across all functions. So while we certainly do a high percentage of our automation within the finance function, our automations transcend beyond finance. So really getting into core business operations, supply chain, HR, many other functions. So just think of us as ability to really orchestrate across all those different applications you have out there, and to also be able to handle and orchestrate much more complex processes in general. The last thing I'll say is setup is you may also have heard about the concept of autonomous finance. I know Gartner's talked about this as well, and I think being a finance person, often alarms people to think, wait, there's going to be no people, and AI is just going to manage all of finance, and that's certainly not going to be the case. Really, what we're talking about is for all the simple activities, more transactional tasks, those will definitely be auto-generated by AI in the future. But really, even out in the future, the more complex transactions, they're really always going to involve human in the loop. And so the difference, though, is AI will act as an assistant. So it'll bring in a lot of information, provide recommendations that then a human can take a look at and apply judgment to those types of transactions. So think of autonomous finance as a combination of those two approaches. Um, So next, I want to shift more towards use cases. And in the context of use cases, I think historically, particularly back in the RPA days, most of the use cases were solely focused around efficiency. How can I, streamline processes, purely accelerate the close? And don't get me wrong, efficiency is still a major focus. But I think the difference now is with the advent of AI, you're able to do a lot more because, as I mentioned, you're able to do more complex processes. And so as a result, we're seeing a lot of additional benefits from these use cases, including things like improving cash flow, particularly when you get into areas like, order to cash and billing. In addition, significant strengthening around controls and reducing risk, which is again, equally top of mind in finance as around just, streamlining the close process. And so, as I'll talk about later, we're seeing a lot of use cases around how can I strengthen those controls to avoid anomalous transactions or audit findings down the road. And then lastly, overall, it's really made to enhance decision making, right? So all that AI does is brings all that information to you at your fingertips to enhance ultimately making a decision, whether that's around how to make a business decision or how to book a certain finance transaction. So in terms of use cases, this is usually what I'm asked most about, which is, hey, what are the highest value use cases? Where should I start? So this is by no means a list of all use cases. These are some of the common ones we see in each of the most common towers within finance. So I'm just going to briefly give some highlights here, and then what I want to do is actually give you several examples, which makes it more real, I think, for everyone. So starting in the far left, AP processing. So historically, a lot of organizations, frankly, started their automation journey in finance, and in particular, they started in AP. And again, AP is a great area for automation because it meets a lot of the criteria you would look at when you're prioritizing opportunities. So, high volume of transactions, a lot of typically manual activity, very document intensive, and so that's why areas like invoice processing, for example, have taken a lot of focus. And even though that's a use case that's been around for a long time, we're seeing a lot of enhancements of use cases. So some use cases, when organizations looking at AI, aren't brand new. They're really enhancing those. So now the ability, as you'll see later, to really be able to process more things that might have been a manual exception you had to manually handle, now we're able to handle with AI. And then there are also additional use cases like in the AP space that are evolving. And I'll show you some examples around, validating tax rates to ensure that you're not overpaying taxes from a supplier invoice, or thinking about even if I've approved an invoice, when would be the optimal time to pay that? Should I pay it early to get a supplier discount, or should I maximize cash flow by paying it as late as possible before the due date. So those are some highlights within the AP space. The next area I mentioned, which is really getting, I think, equal, if not even more attention nowadays, is around order to cash, particularly because, again, you not only drive efficiency, but now you're also driving optimization of cash flow. So, some of the use cases go from, processing sales orders, again, validating those when you're creating invoices, to applying cash. And I think the difference versus maybe traditional use cases nowadays is, again, it's more of those exceptions that used to be handled manually. So, for example, to the extent someone disputes an invoice or makes a partial payment, now you're able to leverage AI so it can either fully process that autonomously or raise that to an individual in the cash application space to say, hey, here's the issue, here's the partial payment, here's all the information you need to make a decision about how you're going to go about applying that. And that's particularly true also when you get into the area of collections, where again, AI can really enhance the process by identifying what's the appropriate approach to, optimize the collection of past due receivables. The next area, which I'm spending a lot of time on these days, is around recorder reports. So that's sort of the core accounting financial close. And again, a lot of use cases existed for quite some time around, basic, simple, complex, or sorry, simple reconciliations, simple journal entries. Again, the difference today, and I'll show you some examples, are around now taking those more complex accounting transactions that require a lot more knowledge around technical accounting and like GAAP and IFRS standards, and being able to infuse that into the automation. So rather than having to defer that to someone who's been, in technical accounting for 20 years, the AI agent can actually summarize key elements around accounting standards and then be able to provide guidance. So I'll show you an example of that. So we're seeing, again, a lot of things around more, complex transactions in that space. And then lastly, around FP&A. So again, historically, automations used to be focused around sourcing data, automating manual reports. And now a lot more of the use cases are really focused around how do I interpret the information? How do I really not just calculate variances, but understand what's the underlying drivers of variances, or do scenario analysis to figure out how I can improve financial performance, or even create, management discussion and analysis reports that really summarize all those key elements around financial performance. If you look at all those use cases, and again, these aren't all of them, you can also go about prioritizing, because I think the key issue for individuals is not so much lack of ideas about where you can automate, but how do I go about prioritizing? And so typically we prioritize based on kind of a 2 by 2 matrix. So, on the y-axis, what's the business value? Obviously, that's the key driver is how much volume am I going to derive out of this? And then the other factor is, of course, the complexity of automation. So how easy is it going to be to implement those automations? So again, it's not an exact science, but you can see some of those things in the upper right where high value, like I mentioned, areas like AP invoice processing, and at the same time, relatively simple based on, again, not only, the simplicity of automation, but also, sort of experience by organizations such as ours to implement those. And then lastly, obviously a lot of business benefits. I always encourage people to start focusing on the benefits and the business challenges first. So here you can see ultimately the outcomes that you'll see in all those spaces, things like driving down cost per invoice, improving working capital, driving down days to close, and better insights in the FP&A space. So with that, I want to spend the remainder of my time talking specifically about some use case examples. And so this first one I alluded to in the record to report space around more complex, historically manual journal entries and reconciliations. And what typically the issue here is that, historically, a lot of these have been, fully manual, mostly, and also very time consuming, because someone will have to go into the accounting standards, understand exactly what accounting standards are applicable, develop memos, prepare, preliminary journal entry, and have additional review. And so what you can see kind of by this screenshot is what AI agents are able to do is actually pull up all the relevant accounting standards basically going out to the, IFRS or FASB websites, pulling in the relevant information, summarizing that, also providing, basic information, extracting from, contracts and other relevant source documents, the nature of the transaction, and basically providing, as you can see on the right, sort of agent recommendations in terms of how should you go about booking the entry, and also the ability to chat with the AI agent, right? So if you want to do a little more understanding about the nature of maybe your internal company policies or external standards, you can basically chat in natural language to provide more guidance and assist with that research, and ultimately then be able to book the entry more effectively. Another example is around flux analysis. So again, AI agents are leveraged in two instances in this case. So one can be certainly around, like as you see in the example here, maybe just a better understanding of financial performance. So those in FP&A, they might want to understand, what's the variances around expenses or variances around revenues, and really be able to drill in a lot more deeper to understand what the variances are. But they're also direct applicability within accounting, where you could look at a particular general ledger account, compare that to prior periods, and identify, are there some anomalous trends? Like did the amount in that general ledger account go significantly up or down? And is that significantly different than just volume based, right? And it could identify maybe missing transactions, perhaps, fraudulent transactions, and basically point that out, which is, really critical both from a control standpoint to make sure you don't have accuracy issues, but also from an accounting standpoint, of helping with maybe booking an accrual that needs to be made. Another area is in order to cash. I'm not going to go into obviously all of this, but you can see across the entire chain in terms of going from setting up a new customer, evaluating credit and what the credit limit should be, to actually creating the invoices, validating them against the original purchase order, making sure the tax rates are right, to then applying the cash as the payments come in, particularly again in the more complex ones where they aren't paying exactly the amount that's on the invoice, and handling some of those discrepancies, to again collections when you get into past due receivables and determining what's the optimal strategy to collect. Should I contact the customer directly via phone? Should I issue them additional dunning notices? In some instances, maybe writing off it because it looks like all the efforts to date haven't paid off, and additional effort probably doesn't make sense. So really a lot of potential agents across that whole chain. And then the last example I have is around tax rate validation. And again, even if you aren't in the tax space, this is really useful overall for managing compliance against, frankly, any regulation. So in this case, it might be going against tax rates. And if you go into, if you look into regions with very complex tax codes or very complex regulations in general, such as like Brazil for tax codes, you can actually leverage the automation to go out, look at the regulation, or in this case, the tax codes, ingest those, and then apply those in this case to, for example, supplier invoices come in to make sure that you're being charged the appropriate rate. In this case, a large energy company in Brazil, such as Petrobras, was able to save like $120 million a year just by identifying overcharges associated with tax rates. But the same process could be applied also to when you're creating invoices for customers to ensure that you are applying the appropriate rates. And again, more broadly, to look at overall, any type of regulation and provide guidance in terms of making sure that you're operating within the appropriate standards as dictated by the regulations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Anmol, and so he'll talk about the last use case I mentioned around accounts payable, and then share with us a demo. So Anmol, I'll hand it off to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ken. And hey, everyone, great to meet you. I'm Anmol Sinha with our Agentic AI solutions team here at Automation Anywhere. Um, and so, as Ken was mentioning, I just wanted to discuss our accounts payable solution that's able to handle agentic accounts payable. Before going into a high-level overview of the solution, the one key thing I want to flag is when we think about our accounts payable solution, it's meant to be very flexible and customizable exactly to your accounts payable process. And so whenever we have different steps that have been built into accounts payable processes over years or decades, our solution can automate exactly those steps. But looking at a very high level, our accounts payable process or solution will handle automation following the steps flagged below. Where first, we're able to grab invoices from effectively any modality where the invoices might be coming in, whether they're part of an email inbox, they're being sent to a SharePoint site, or even if they're physical documents that get scanned and then saved in a network drive somewhere. Our solution can identify those invoices wherever they're stored and pull them into our solution. From there, they can go through some document automation to actually extract key bits of invoice information like vendor numbers, due dates, total dollar amounts, etc. And this capability to do the extraction isn't traditional OCR, where we have to do extensive templating or pre-training, but we're just able to pull that information out using a mix of AI and computer vision. And after we get that invoice information, we're able to validate that the invoice is actually valid for payment using advanced data matching. So our solution can identify whether we want to do things like compare against a purchase order or goods received note, or encode the invoice with a GL code, or anything along those lines, and make sure that our invoice has actually been validated for final payment. Now, from there, if there's no errors in the validation, our invoices can proceed downstream for further processing. But in case there are, that's where our solution also has what we call a human in the loop stage, where the solution can flag any exceptions that pop up in the data validation back over to an accounts payable specialist. And not only does it flag the exception to the AP specialist, but it will also give a brief summary of all of the work that's been done in the processing up until the exception happens, a summary of the exception, and then also a few recommended next best actions for how to resolve the type of exception that pops up. So the AP specialist doesn't have to take over processing the invoice downstream. They just select the next best action that's most appropriate for the invoice at that stage, and our solution can continue to do the downstream processing. After we resolve any exceptions, the next stage is just to use our historical data and an enterprise knowledge base of standard operating procedures to maximize the value on any invoice paid. That means we can use our historical data to do things like look for fraudulent invoices, look for duplicates, but then also compare against contract terms or payment terms to make sure that we're optimizing our payment schedules for our invoices and really making sure that we're getting the most value out of every single invoice that we're paying. And after we've validated our invoices and maximized the value, of course, finally, we can integrate with ERP systems downstream to actually proceed with the payments and processing. So really the goal of our accounts payable solution here is to transform the accounts payable team and function from being an operator function that has to touch every invoice or handle so much of the volumes manually to being more of AP pilots that are able to oversee the accounts payable process as it's run autonomously by agents and only step in to resolve particular issues or exceptions that bubble up while overseeing the health of the overall process. So let me shift over into a quick demo of our accounts payable solution. Um, and so what we have here is a demo instance of our accounts payable solution, starting initially with a dashboard view. And this dashboard view allows me to see everything that's happening within the accounts payable realm, both operational things, things like how many invoices my solution is processing, which ones are autonomously processed versus which ones require escalation back over to a human agent. And also, I can see more strategic metrics that allow me to see the overall health of my accounts payable process. So I can see my overall liability exposure and outstanding spend within my invoices, average resolution time, so I can maintain my vendor relationships, etc. And this dashboard is, of course, something that's fully customizable to have all of the metrics that are most relevant to you, but it can be a one-stop shop to see the overall health of an accounts payable process. But going from this dashboard level view, I like to shift over into something that's much more underneath the hood about how our accounts payable process is actually being run by our agentic AI agents. And so let me pivot over into the sort of more granular view, what we call our workstream builder view. And this is where our solution really gives you the flexibility to customize the accounts payable processing to exactly the process that you've defined. So we have these various chevrons that we can drag and drop into place that are instructions for our AI agents to be able to handle your accounts payable process. And you can see after we've dragged and dropped them into place, we do things like classifying invoices into various invoice types, whether they require a two-way match, three-way match, etc., extracting information, approvals if required, doing any three-way matching, updating systems of records. All of these instructions can be loaded into this granular view. And what's really key is if I click into any one of these, I can see that I'm actually giving my solution and my agents instructions in plain English. So this really gives the control of the agentic accounts payable process back over to the business teams because it doesn't require heavy technical development efforts, but instead we can just define our invoice processing or accounts payable rules in plain English, feed them into our AI agents, and our AI agents are able to do kind of the autonomous processing downstream. Now, from this workstream builder view, what I want to show is how our invoices will actually get processed, where any invoices that don't have any exceptions will get autonomously processed through our solution. But whenever we do actually need to bring in that human in the loop step I mentioned, we also have this concept of an AP queue. This AP queue is where any of our AP exceptions will get bubbled back up, and our AP specialists have the ability to address these exceptions and make sure that we're resolving the invoices that have exceptions right away. So within my queue, over here on the left, I can see 9 different open invoices that have various exception types that have been bubbled up to me. Some invoice total mismatches, some line item issues, currency mismatches, et cetera, et cetera. So our solution can quickly summarize the exception type that's popped up, but I also have the ability to click into each individual invoice and actually see how the processing has been done. Up here within this first invoice that has an invoice total mismatch, I can see that my solution has gone through the intake, the data extraction, classifying the invoice, retrieving associated documentation, and validating that this wasn't a duplicate or fraudulent invoice. But I froze at the matching stage. And my solution has actually flagged this for me and mentioned that I had an invoice total of 5250, which mismatched our purchase order total of $4,800. And it also brought up the relevant documents for me to be able to review right next to each other if I wanted to. So based on this information, it's recommended a couple of next best actions for me to resolve this. I can either go ahead and resolve this mismatch because I understand why the mismatch might have been there, and I could leave a comment, or I could reject this invoice and ask the vendor to re-invoice us based on the purchase order amount. One last thing to show with any of these invoices is not only do we have a single pane of glass view for these exceptions, but we also have a conversational agent that's very context aware about every invoice that's being processed. And within this conversational agent, I can ask it questions about why an invoice was flagged, what I should do, or any other questions in plain English that can really help guide me in terms of standard company policies and procedures on how to resolve the invoice. And so if I asked it a question, it would understand the context of this particular invoice that I'm processing, look up my policies, and provide me a recommendation that I really need to verify whether the invoice total or mismatch is legitimate, or otherwise I should reject the invoice. So with this conversational agent recommendation, I can go ahead and reject this invoice. Once my solution asks me to confirm it, we can see that this moves out of our open queue into something that's done with downstream processing happening. Now, the last thing to really show about our solution is not only is this a single pane of glass for our accounts payable teams, but it also is a one-stop shop for all approvers to be able to look at their invoices that are out for approvals and manage those within our solution. So within my AP queue, I can go from my AP exceptions to my AP approvals, and I can see that I have various invoices that have open approvals as well. And so for any of these, it's a similar process where I can see how the invoice has been processed so far, the reason for the approval, supporting documentation, and some recommended next best actions for what action to take to approve the invoice. These approvals will also be routed exactly to the exact appropriate approver, and they'll be able to use our agentic solution for accounts payable to not have to research different documents in different applications, not have to, communicate across multiple systems of records, but just be able to see a summary of the work that they need to do, the approvals that are required from them, and click a button to approve or reject invoices as they pop up. The last thing to keep in mind with our agentic solution here is every single step that's done within our solution is carefully logged and auditable so that we can go back in and look at every single action that was taken, either by an AI or by a human, and make sure that we understand the history of every single invoice and how it was processed. So our solution provides full transparency and auditability into our AP process and make sure that as we have these process pilots overseeing the process, they can understand the individual level details of every invoice as it's processed as well. So Ken, I'll hand it back over to you. But would love to, connect for a deeper demo. Of course, this is just scratching the surface of our accounts payable capabilities, but I'm happy to share more details as well.
Great. Thanks a lot, Emil. And I wanted to mention 2 points about that demo. So one, for those of you that, are not managing AP, I often find that demo helpful because just think about the capabilities it's showing, right? So even if it's a completely different process, the ability to ingest documents, the ability to match information like a reconciliation, the ability to get agentic guidance in terms of how to handle a complex process. So that's, I would think about that again, because what he's shown you, those same types of things are applicable to many processes across finance. And on top of that, the platform's designed, while, we have a solution in AP, it's very customizable. So even if you have a completely different process, you can use that same agentic solution workspace to very easily create, your own automation for your own specific process, as well as to, customize what you've seen there. So what I want to do next is actually welcome an additional guest speaker here. I'll pull up slides just so you can see who we all are. But I'm happy to welcome Vic from Conduent, who has a vast amount of experience in the finance space. And before he introduces himself, I just want to remind everyone to use that Q&A button because after we get some of his insights, we'll be turning it to all of you to get some questions. In fact, I did see one already come through, which I'll probably hand over to Vic first. But before I do so, Vic, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Vic Thacker. I am the business leader for finance, accounting, and procurement for Conduent. I have about 5,000 people around the world who perform finance, accounting operations for a number of clients that range from large mid-market clients to Fortune 500 clients. So prior to Conduent, I was at Genpact, which is a large outsourcing company. And before that, I was also at Bank of America, where I was a global finance operations projects team. So any initiative that impacted the bank's financial infrastructure, my team ran. So Ken, thanks for having me.
Sure, great. So what I thought I'd do is start off with a couple of questions, and we'll take a couple from the audience. Actually, I'm going to mix it up a little bit and actually start with a question that actually I wanted to ask you, but came directly from the audience as well, which was, how do you go about ensuring, accuracy and governance and controls with agentic automation, particularly in mission critical processes, such as finance?
Great question. So I think there's a few elements to it, right? So there's probably three things that I look at. Number one is there a definitive answer that we can get to, that it's a truth, it's not a judgment call, but there's an actual number or something that we can get to that we can always audit against. Number two, is there a human in the loop somewhere? Now, not the idea that the human in the loop is auditing and checking everything that the agent is doing, but for the appropriate types of things, it could be risk-based, that type of thing. And number three, what type of auditability have we built in? I think you did a fantastic job in your demonstration showing in the AP that as things go through every decision, everything is logged. So we are able to go back through and find what the decision was made and any changes are made and who approved it, or if it was done by the machine. So I think those are some of the key things that we want to take a look at from when you're looking at the agent actually executing. From a governance perspective, that becomes a little bit becomes a little bit broader in terms of what the organizations are willing to invest in, right? So some of our clients, they have AI governance committees already in place, and they have very specific types of regulations or rules that they want to apply against it. So they have like risk cutoffs, they have standardized architectures, they have a testing and bias protocols that are in place. So we try and apply what the guidance is from our clients to make sure any agents that we deploy adhere to their governance standards. But those are the types of things that are included.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same things, and you mentioned a couple of interesting points. So one is, obviously the concern, particularly about AI, is around accuracy, right? And you're going to get consistent answers. And so I think that's the point where I started off with around the concept of agentic process automation. Like every process doesn't have to use AI. In fact, if you can use a more deterministic process because maybe it's just simple yes/no answer with a simple rules base, that's where RPA is applicable. So you have the combination of both from a control standpoint. The other piece is, of course, leveraging an enterprise grade platform. I mean, there are lots of new AI startups out there. They're all interesting, but particularly like I deal and like because does as well with a lot of regulated entities. And so, having that enterprise grade platform that has, roles-based access, data security, audit trails, et cetera, is really critical to give organizations comfort. Obviously, I think you should use ours, but making sure you have that in general is really critical. And a couple other interesting things. So one is I've actually seen organizations for a really critical process using automation to actually validate the output of the automation. Seems odd, but particularly in the days as the technology is evolving, sort of just like how you have someone who maybe creates an entry and then a reviewer entry. Similarly, you can have sort of roles-based access, if you will, for automations, right? So ones that creates the answer and then another one that actually double checks that against other sources. And then the last thing that, Vic mentioned as well is certainly the ultimate control is human in the loop. So I do see a lot of organizations, especially early on when they're rolling out automation, to maybe build more human checks early on. And then as they get more comfortable with it, sort of pare back on that over time. So let me go to the next question. I talked a little bit about use cases, but I'm curious from your perspective, what you've seen as some of the most, promising ones or most successful ones to date.
Thanks. So I think you did a great job laying out what are some of the criteria that are useful in terms of thinking about use cases. So volume and repeatability, having judgment-heavy exceptions, having something that's either unstructured data or document-heavy inputs. I think those are the kind of things that you want to look at when you think about use cases. Certainly where we've seen a lot of use cases are like what you showed with the AP and the invoicing processing. You showed some in record to report. We've got an interesting use case. We have a product called FastCap, and what it does is it compares what's in a contract versus what's actually being in the accounts payable system. And we'll identify variances and then we go recover it for clients. One of the interesting things about where we've applied Agentic on that is we feed it 5,000 contracts and the agent will go and read all the contracts, identify anything that's not a contract like NDAs. It'll define part term sheets, it'll find duplicates, eliminate all of those documents, and then kind of bring it down. And then it runs through the actual extraction of the relevant information and compare it against the AP invoices. So it's able to read the invoices if it's not within the ERP system itself. So that's kind of an unusual use case that really leverages the power of generative AI within the Automation Anywhere platform and other platforms. Also, along with the Agentic to be able to transfer things across a process, to be able to really accelerate what would have taken analysts weeks to do. We do in a matter of hours now.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And I think I've seen, again, people I think try to think of AI use cases. Again, I wouldn't think about the technology. I think about the challenge and then decide what the technology is. But my point is, and also they try to think of new use cases, like, hey, what have we never done before? And so, to your point, and what I mentioned earlier, I'm seeing equally, if not more, use cases that are more enhancements of existing use cases, right? Like AP invoice processing is not new, but the ability to really handle more complex exceptions on a a basis, or when you get into again order to cash, it's more of the looking at again like disputes or partial payments or or again like collections areas where you haven't been able to collect. So it's those things where you can leverage the agents to provide more judgment and guidance. And then, as I mentioned as well, around the record to report space, it is really more things around. I get personally more excited. I mean, certainly about handling more complex entries, but also from that control aspect, right? Like being able to proactively go out and say, hey, look for all the transactions that meet this type of criteria, which could either be, again, within finance or internal audit. Like an example would be around, handling lease accounting, where you might look at certain contracts and say, is this actually applicable to, accounting around embedded leases, and be able to find instances where maybe they haven't been accounted for correctly, right? So those things you weren't able to do before, I think are some of the more exciting use cases leveraging AI, but again, always with that human in the loop. So Stina, I don't want to leave you out here, so let me ask you a question. And a lot of the I think the challenge the organizations have is they rush out and they try to adopt all kinds of different AI technologies, and they end up with huge fragmentation and a lot of additional sort of uh, tech spend and attention focus on that. And so I'm curious from your perspective how you've seen automate, standardizing on a platform like ours, being able to sort of prevent that sprawl, improving governance, and ensuring that organizations have sort of a cohesive view when they're looking to orchestrate across both automations and across systems.
Yeah, this is a very timely and highly relevant question for the time we are in. We see AI rapidly shaping up and evolving every day, and it learns, right? So everybody wants to adopt AI in their own ways, right? In the rush, what happens, we generally observe this in the clients that we work with. Every business unit wants to adopt AI and they want to be in the race. So they start building AI agents on their own, and then they start creating the silos of agents sitting in their desks sometimes. Sometimes it goes to the central agent repository and then they use it. But ultimately, a platform like Automation Anywhere actually helps us bring in the governance, bring in the centralized approach where the agents can be distributed among the business functions in the right manner, where the controls are centralized, where the data is centralized, where the whole audit trail is kept. So this is a great move from agent fragment to a platform that actually interacts with every other system.
Yeah, no, that's what we're seeing as well. I mean, particularly the ability to orchestrate across multiple agents and across multiple systems is, I think, one of the big differentiators. And also, again, that sort of enterprise grade, single view and platform and control, so people can't, put something into production before it's been fully reviewed, or certainly again, I work with a lot of regulated industries, the ability to ensure that you have all the appropriate security controls, particularly with all the AI governance oversight that most companies have that Vic mentioned is really critical. So one last question before I throw it out to the audience here is, so be preparing your questions and put them in the queue. So I know we all like to talk about wins and successes, but Vic, I'm curious in your perspective about like what challenges of organizations encounter when they go to implement, AI automations, and what are some of the best practices that you've seen in terms of automating or implementing agentic automation, particularly in finance?
Sure. So I think there's a few. One is one challenge that I've seen is people start off with, they might have like a Microsoft Copilot or something like that, and they think that's agentic AI, and they start off with that. And it's a great way to pilot something or do something as a proof of concept, but it typically can't scale. It typically runs into issues, and there are some challenges with not being an enterprise grade platform in terms of auditability and those types of things, right? So what I tell clients is, hey, if you want to experiment with something, you want to do like a reconciliation, or you want to be able to build like a chatbot that helps answer questions, great place to start. but don't expect that that'll probably be the be all and end all, because you will start to run into some of these challenges down the line. The second big one that I've seen is actually around requirements, right? So even though agentic automation and automation anywhere platforms are significantly easier to use than systems in the past, they are still a system. And so you got to be able to nail down the requirements very clearly up front, and also ensure that it's very clearly delineated what the testing and approval requirements will be before it goes into production. So that's a typical thing I've seen with any system. But for some reason, when people think about low code, no code, or RPA or agentic AI, they think it's easier and that you can be more vague, right? In terms of turning those around. And then I think the last one is, how do you organize to be able to effectively implement agentic AI, right? And so, what we're seeing is we've developed a center of expertise. We're seeing that in some of our clients. I think that's where things will begin. And then as agentic AI and the tools become easier to use, you'll move into some type of citizen developer. But you probably need in the beginning to centralize some of those capabilities to be able to really drive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think a couple of things I've seen on my end, I've alluded to a couple earlier. So one is just around use case selection, right? Not everything lends itself towards agentic automation. And I think, again, the biggest issue people run into is they think like, where could I apply AI, right? Which is not the right question. It's like, what are my biggest business challenges? What are the KPIs I'm trying to improve? And then you can figure out what technology, as opposed to if you just do an ideation session saying, hey, what ideas do you have that you want to automate, right? You might get a bunch of things that save 15 minutes here or there, once a week or twice a week, and not really the things that are going to, drive value. The second thing I'd say is to again start with some quick wins. Like, often I've seen organizations pick like the most complex process in the entire organization, like, hey, let's start with that, right? And so while certainly it can handle complex processes, I'd start with some things that maybe like you can get some quick wins and business benefits early, and then once you've done that, people get more comfortable with the technology. I don't just mean the business, like audit, compliance, risk, all the different stakeholders. People see what it can do, and then it'll also generate additional ideas. And then once you do that, though, don't get trapped in I'm going to do 1,000 POCs, because you'll never really get to scale, and the market's still moving quickly. And so I would, then work to scale. And then the last thing I mentioned, I alluded to a lot of the sort of oversight teams within any organization. So I'd work with them early. A lot of times people identify use case, they map it out, they design it, and then when they're ready to, develop it and produce it, then they start engaging, AI governance council and risk and audit and what have you. And that's a sure way to at least fail or dramatically delay your project, based on my personal experience as well in industry. So, engage them early, right? And they're really all there to help and ensure that you got a successful implementation. So I would engage them early on, find out, for example, from the AI Governance Council, hey, what are the criteria to go ahead and implement? What are the things they're looking for, so that as you're developing and designing, you're ensuring that you're going to meet those and not encounter barriers later. So those are some of the things I've seen. So with that, I'm going to open it to the group. In the meantime, there actually was one that came in that was related to sort of your last comment, Vic, which is around organizations. So maybe if you could expand a little bit more in terms of how organizations typically structure the implementation efforts around, an agentic program.
Yeah, thanks. So, every client, and we had Conduent do it somewhat differently, but one of the things that I am starting to see convergence on is some type of COE around particularly agentic, right? So they may pick a platform or two. In our case, it's Automation Anywhere. Some of our clients have some others as well, and they build a COE around it. So they've got business analysts and those types of things who understand the art of the possible with agentic AI and with generative AI. And then they've got developers and those kinds of people who are trained specifically in the selected platforms that have been used, right? So we've kind of built out that knowledge. And then that knowledge can then be shared with people across the COE. So that's the way that we've started to go down our journey to make sure that we've got the capabilities to be able to expand. And as I mentioned, I think over time, what you're going to find is that some of these capabilities will become a little bit more mainstream, and we may shift into some type of citizen developer where people like in our operations will be able to say, you know, this is a simple agent that I'm going to build. I don't need the COE for this, and I'll be able to do it on my own. But I think that's going to take time, you know, until we have built our overall muscle to be able to support them.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same things, and I agree. I mean, typically it helps to have a small centralized team. Doesn't necessarily have to be managed by IT. Obviously, IT has to be heavily engaged, but that team can really help around education, help with the ideation, obviously help in terms of development, support, and maintenance. And then, as you said, I see over time, more citizen development. Again, I think it's in the early stages, probably a bit early, but you're already seeing a huge number of AI-driven tools, right? So the ability, like we have Automator AI that can actually help developers create the automation. Now, you're still going to have to add enhancements or what have you, but even the ability now, we have like goal-based agents that you can basically type in, this is what I want to do, and it'll basically give you the process flow, give you, starter automations, etc. Also look out, see all the automations are out there. So I think that's coming, but initially it's really key to have that centralized team to ensure, consistency and controls. But at the same time, it's also critical to have a federated organization such that there's really a point person within each business unit or each function because they're more familiar with what are my business issues, what are my needs. They can help in terms of design and testing. So I think having that federated type of organization. And then the only other caveat I'd give is I see organizations that had like a centralized RPA COE, for example, and then they're setting up separate AI COEs. And to me, it doesn't make sense. Just like the concept of agentic process automation, I think it should be an automation COE, almost irrespective of the tools, because then that group can determine what are the appropriate tools as opposed to focusing solely on one. And I think organizations are moving there, but I think because there are so many concerns around AI, that's why immediately everyone set up AI governance councils and AI COEs. But I think it's evolving more towards, automation and digital transformation as opposed to, AI based transformation. Let's see. I think we have an additional question coming here. So this is an interesting one. Maybe Celestine or Vic, be interested in your perspective. So how do you manage integration between existing legacy financial systems and modern AI agent platforms? Celestine, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, certainly. Typically, when we go to any client, there's always legacy systems involved. Wherever there is API involved, we will actually go with that approach. API first is more reliable. And wherever there is absence of API, RPA would actually kick in, where we can actually capture those screens and then record those inputs that we need to give. So that's how we typically manage our automation. That's why platform like Automation Anywhere actually helps us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting because even, in the RPA days, we're able to integrate with, again, I've seen a lot of financial organizations, so you can find green screens behind the UI. And so there's always been that ability to integrate with that. But again, now, particularly with AI platform, really platforms such as are able to, work, whether it's legacy, whether it's AI agent or what have you, seamlessly and in a variety of different mechanisms, right? So it could be through APIs, it could be directly through the UI or what have you. So I think that's one of the benefits is the ability to integrate with all those different systems, whether it's sort of leading edge or more legacy. We're having a couple other questions come in, so I'm going to go to those to make sure we don't run out of time here. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a question around, as organizations move from sort of basic RPA to more, managed services powered by AI agents, what type of operational metrics or, KPIs should a organization look through in terms of, managing sort of delivery excellence?
So I can take that one. So I think there's two elements to it. So when we are looking at automating or improving a process, oftentimes the KPIs and SLAs wind up being the same as they were before, right? If you think about something like accounts payable, what's your DPO? What is your number of invoices paid on time? Those types of things stay. And what you want to be able to do is measure, are you seeing any improvement or at least adherence to the standards that have already been in place? So there's kind of like that one for overall outcomes you want to look at. Then if you want to look at specifically, what is my AI strategy, and is it actually providing the return on investment that I put in for the different processes? What you want to be able to take a look at are things like, what's the percentage of exceptions or first pass processing that is going through the system, right? So in a traditional AP, you get a lot of exceptions. Now, with the agents being in place and that they're able to handle exceptions, you should start seeing the first pass yield significantly spike up, right? You should be able to see what the type of FTE staffing that you have in place relative to before the process. You should be able to look at if you have an employee or a customer or vendor self-service aspect for something like a help desk. What are you seeing in terms of shifting from a live call into using the chatbot that uses generative AI or agentic AI? So those are the kinds of things that you should be looking at. But always what you want to do is, what's the outcome of the process, and is it adhering or improving?
Yeah, and
that's your perspective.
Yeah, and that relates to sort of a question that came through similarly in terms of people are saying, how do you measure the outcome of AI automation? I think you've covered it, but I think the difference I'm seeing is before it was all like time saved in FTEs. Now, because of those, additional capabilities, we're seeing things like improvement in cash flow, enabling, revenue growth right through scalability, managing risk. And sometimes those are harder to measure, but I would look for like secondary measures to help drive that. Well, great questions that came through. I want to hand it back to Celestine quickly to wrap up before we end here. So Celestine, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Anmol, Vic, and Ken for an insightful session. I'm sure the participants found it insightful too. I would like to quickly recap what we discussed. We shared the perspectives on how to transform the finance organization through autonomous agents with data extraction, understanding summarization, Copilot, and so on. And we've also experienced autonomous agents that are put to work using Automation Anywhere suite of platforms, and how to increase efficiency, improve cash flow, and so on for a CFO organizations. With over 5 years of lasting partnership with Automation Anywhere as a platinum partner, Amiseq has delivered a number of agentic process automation to our clients, delivering value over $2 million to our clients in the recent past alone. All of the use cases that you see over here are the ones that we deliver to an F&A team, where the agents work autonomously through autonomous agents, help them in process optimization, improving cash flow and compliance. So one of the examples that you see at the very top, Agentic APA inbox management alone has freed up about 30% of their day-to-day operations. Likewise, the benefits add up all these APA use cases that we delivered to this client. If you want to learn more about these use cases and take up finance transformation, you may reach out to us for a free one-on-one consultation to uncover opportunities with clear ROI that is personalized to your finance department. With that, we have come to the end of the session. Any questions that are unanswered will be answered directly to the participants. More importantly, if you're ready to start your journey, please reach out to us at info@amiseq.com. Once again, thank you, Ken, Vic, and Anmol, for sharing valuable insights. Thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.